I have to say that all the arguments that I can recall for women being unsuitable for certain roles and jobs are either overtly sexist or they're just flimsy excuses that do a pretty poor job of disguising the underlying sexism. I think that if a woman has the same skills and qualifications as a man who's doing a certain job, then there's no reason why she shouldn't also be considered as capable of doing that job. And there's certainly no reason why she shouldn't be paid the same wage as a man who would be doing that job. Now, my one qualifier on this is that it doesn't need to be completely equal. There shouldn't be any kind of special allowances for women. We've had Wimbledon here in the UK recently, and in the past there have been complaints from female tennis players that the women's prize money in tennis is generally less than it is for men. Now, I'd say that if it's about 2/5 lower than it is for men, then that's about fair, because women play 3 sets in a match and men play 5. So as another example of this, I've got people in my life, amongst my friends and family, who've served in the British Army. And in the British Army, the fitness qualification criteria for women are less stringent than they are for men. Now, I think that's actually counterproductive, because quite often when you have a female officer, you will find that some of the males under her command have less respect for her, because they consider, with some justification, that she's less qualified than a male commander. In my view, women should be expected to satisfy the same fitness requirements as men. They shouldn't be allowed to run a shorter distance with a lighter field kit and at a slower speed. If they can do the job, then fine, but if not, then I don't see why that should be any different from a man who can't meet the standard. Now, this argument that a woman in a combat situation would be a liability to her colleagues strikes me as being a sneakily disguised bit of sexism. Now, you mentioned this, but I'm going to paraphrase it just to illustrate the point. I think it's basically saying that women are going to be a disruptive influence. And in fact, the discrimination against the woman is not because of her potential performance in this situation, but the potential performance of her male colleagues. Now, if the men in the army really are that undisciplined that they can't cope with having women in the same team as them, then I think an easy solution is to have all female combat teams. But I really don't think that's going to be necessary. There's this expectation that soldiers are going to be professionals because that's what they're trained to be. Is it really valid to assume that a male soldier is going to put the safety of a female colleague above that of his fellow male colleagues, or even above the value of the mission at hand, when that same expectation wouldn't apply to him and his male colleagues? Now, I've never been in the armed forces, so I can't speak from experience, but I'm not convinced that that's a valid argument. And I think you can actually extend it out further and say something along the lines of, well, we shouldn't let Muslims in the army because they might have to fight fellow Muslims, or there might be a fellow Muslim on the team who ends up being injured, and if they're careful, then it'll jeopardise the mission. Or Catholics, in case we have to fight a Catholic country, or in case somebody on the team gets wounded and they need the last rites. This stops making sense pretty quickly if you start extending it out and bringing in other groups, but the actual argument is no different from the one being used to exclude women. And I think that really the most unfair aspect of this is that you're discriminating against one set of people because of the actions of a completely different set of people, one over which they have no control. And it's insulting as well because it kind of underestimates both the professionalism and the commitment of the male troops. So my answer would be yes, women should be allowed in combat. If there's some kind of underlying problem with this idea, then fix that problem. Treat the cause of it, not the symptoms. Because in a civilised society, it should be a fair society. And not only is this kind of discrimination unfair, it's allowing something that really needs to be fixed to slide. I think more importantly, what it's doing is it's wasting potential talent that might be used more effectively if it wasn't artificially constrained. On a lighter note, if you want to see a great example of the underlying mindset for this kind of thinking, then take a look at the video link I've posted on the sidebar.